Good morning. Glad that you're able to be with us this morning. I appreciate your presence here and have enjoyed worship so far, and that is because of you and because of who, of course, we're worshiping. When we talk about the King of Israel, I don't know what image comes to your mind, or perhaps Bible character comes to your mind. Maybe you think about Solomon and reading, and I'm always amazed at reading about Solomon. I mean, this guy was wealthy, to say the least, and he's got this throne. If you remember the description of his throne and the lions that are on the steps leading up to this throne, made of ivory, covered with gold, like that's extravagant. Uh, Extravagant. Maybe you think about the statement that God made to Samuel as Samuel grieved over the people asking for a king, and God said, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me as being king over this people, my people. So maybe you think about God as the true king of Israel, or maybe you think about David or Saul, the first king. We're going to turn our attention to two places in the Bible. We'll be flipping back and forth between First Samuel, and we'll look at Second Samuel once, but First Samuel and the book of John. Because we have in the Bible, in a lot of different places, a lot of different characters serve as types, and some of them antitypes of Christ. You know, people who are set antithetically against Jesus, who contrast Jesus in a lot of different ways. And there are some others that in a lot of ways, many ways, they resemble Jesus. So as we look at First Samuel and as we look at the book of John, we're going to do that to examine how David was in many ways like Jesus. How David resembled Jesus as the king of Israel. Now we know that the promise, as we read Second Samuel chapter 7, that the promise was made to David that his throne was going to be established and someone was going to reign on his throne forever. Of course, we understand that messianic promise to be Jesus. But as we examine First Samuel and as we examine the book of John, there are a lot of similarities between King David and King Jesus, I think we should probably say. And one of the first ones, as we move through David's life, one of the first ones that we arrive before we're actually ever introduced to David was his heart. We read about the heart of David, again, before we're ever introduced to him in a battle that is set from about Saul and his army against the Philistines. There are arrayed against the nation of Israel, or in this case, there are 30,000 chariots. That's a lot of chariots. And there are 6,000 men on horseback. And as you move across the valley and you look at the nation of Israel, what do they have as their weapons? They've got, if we could say it, pitchforks, goads pulled from the carts, and two swords, Saul's and Jonathan's. They don't have very much. So you see this daunting task in front of them. And in this case, Samuel had told Saul, hey, wait 7 days, and then we'll come and we'll make a sacrifice to God on the seventh day, and ultimately God's going to bless and give you the victory. Seventh day came. Saul got a little restless. And it's recorded for us here in 1 Samuel chapter 13 that Saul forced himself, that's what he says, forced myself to sacrifice to the Lord. Well, that's a big no-no. In that context, Samuel is talking and addressing the mistake that King Saul had made. And it says this in 1 Samuel chapter 13 and verse 14. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded. So what we see about David, again, before we know who David is as we read the Bible, is that this guy, the next king, is going to be a man after God's own heart. If that doesn't speak about Jesus, I don't know what does. The man after God's own heart. It's recorded for us in the book of John, chapter 6. Again, keep your finger here. We're flipping back and forth. But in John chapter 6, this is what Jesus says about himself. Verse 38. Jesus says, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." Don't you see the reflection of the heart of God? Not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. We understand that Jesus was a man after God's own heart. Jesus had God's heart, we could probably say fairly. We understand that Jesus and David share that. They have that in common, that their heart, their dedication to God was very similar. People who were after God's own heart. Another thing that they have in common is their job, right? Their job. They have that in common. If you, again, flip back to 1 Samuel, we see the job of David here. We know what it was. David was a keeper of sheep, right? 1 Samuel chapter 16. David loved keeping the sheep. This is one of my favorite stories about David, because in this story, Samuel comes to the house of Jesse, and Samuel looks at Eliab, the firstborn, and he thinks, surely this is the one that God has chosen. Look at this guy. He looks the part. This is him. I would say that he probably resembled a lot of the same characteristics, natural characteristics that Saul had. Surely this is the guy. And then he looks at all of the sons. And God says, I haven't chosen any of them. Jesse, do you have anyone else? And it's almost like Jesse forgot. Well, yeah, I guess. We've got that ruddy, handsome little one keeping the sheep. Maybe he comes back and he's sunburnt. Maybe his skin at a young age was even leathered from being outside. Maybe he smelt like sheep. Maybe this guy, I don't know. Yeah, we've got one more. But he's out keeping the sheep. And then look at what happens here. Then in verse 13. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose and went back to Ramah. To me, that is incredibly interesting. Here's his brothers who really don't think very much, and his father who really don't think very much, it seems, of David. And in the midst of his brothers, he is anointed, of course, to be the new king. And this is to me, again, to me, and it might not be fascinating to you, but to me, this is the most fascinating part. Because what would you do if you were anointed the new king of Israel? and your father and your brothers really didn't think very much of you, what would you do? I would strut, wouldn't you? I would walk around with my collar popped and I would say, hey, get back to work. Y'all are one day, I'm the new boss, all right? And I would be walking around like the cockiest little boy that's ever been in Israel. That's how I would do it. I don't know about you. I would probably resemble a lot like how Joseph acted. But what does David do? We're not really told, but we can infer verse 19. Therefore, Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me David your son, who is with the sheep. In my mind, that last phrase is the most fascinating part of this whole story. He goes back to the sheep. Listen, the sheep don't care if he's anointed. The sheep don't care if he's got oil on his head. The sheep don't care about any of that. He goes back to his sheep. And again, he's called by Jesse to bring some goodies, cheeses, provisions to his brother in the battle of Goliath. We understand the Philistines in the next chapter, chapter 17. And where is he? Again, he's still with the sheep. I believe it speaks volumes not only to David's character, but it speaks volumes to how much he loved being with his sheep, doesn't it? Where else would he be? He's with the sheep. Doesn't that sound a whole lot like Jesus? In John chapter 10, which we've already gone through in the adult Bible class out here, but in John chapter 10, Jesus describes himself as that shepherd, doesn't he? In fact, he records himself as saying, I am the good shepherd. We're going to begin reading in verse 11, and we're going to read through verse 14. And then we're going to come back. But let's read it all together. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Verse 15, we continue, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus is the good shepherd. We see, let's go back to verse 11. We see the good shepherd sacrifices for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Lays down his life for the sheep. I don't know about you, but I don't know that I'd lay down my life for any animal. Would you? If a lion comes, or the bear, as David said, I've killed lions and bears, I might say, you know what, Mr. Lion, Mr. Bear, go ahead and take one. Let me just get out of your way. I'd be hiding behind the bushes. But the good shepherd is willing to sacrifice his own life for the benefit of his sheep's life. Of course, that's what Jesus did. The sacrifice. Verse 12 speaks to the protection that he gives and has for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. One of my favorite things that Jesus said to his disciples is one of the final things that Jesus said to his disciples. In Matthew chapter 28, you remember that great commission? He says, and behold, I am with you always. The good shepherd never leaves. Jesus, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I am with you always. That is the definition of a good shepherd, someone who stays and protects the sheep. And he stays and protects the sheep because in verse 13, he shows concern for the sheep. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Do you know that Jesus cares for you? Do you know that Jesus has a deep concern for you and what you're going through? A lot of times we think that God only cares about the big things in life. You know, when we're facing illness or disease or whatever, and that's the only time that God's paying attention. When we're going through some type of tragedy in our life, God is there for us. That's not the only time that God is. He is there in those moments, but that's not it. You remember the invitation that Jesus gives in Matthew chapter 11? Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Whatever burden you have in life, the invitation to come to Jesus is there. Because Jesus is concerned about his sheep. He's concerned about your life, what you're going through. Then in verse 14 and verse 15, one of the most impactful statements that Jesus makes, at least in my mind, subtly he says this: I know you. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. There's a lot of meat in that passage. Focus on this. Just as, verse 15 begins, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. This is how well Jesus knows you. Just as the comparative, we're looking at the similarity. Just as God knows me and I know God. So the question is, how well does Jesus know God? How well does God know Jesus? I mean, I don't know. They've spent an eternity together. That's how well God knows you. That's how well Jesus is familiar with you. He knows you. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. I was reading a book a few weeks ago, and the description, the story is told secondhand about an experience that someone had as they traveled and they went to this particular canyon. And as they went to this canyon, there was a really steep ravine. And really down this canyon over to the other side, there was only one way to go. So 3 shepherds happened, and this is a true story, 3 shepherds happened to be bringing their flocks to the same ravine at the same time. The only problem with that, as you can imagine, is sheep look a lot alike, all right? So what happens is these shepherds, they meet, they begin to talk, and they go down this one path together. All 3 flocks blend in. Now what? They walk down this valley. They get to the other side. One shepherd, they say goodbye. One shepherd goes that way. Another goes in the middle, and another over here. So how do you get your sheep? It's a fascinating story. The shepherd over here yells, kee, 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 kee. And all his sheep come flying to him. The shepherd in the middle, he yells, whoop, whoop, whoop. And all those sheep come to him. The shepherd over there, something different. And all of his sheep come running to him. Isn't that fascinating? And then, when the shepherd has his whole flock around him, just by the sound of his voice, he begins to comb through them. Is everyone here? Roll call. Is everyone okay? And then they separate, go different ways. God knows us. Jesus knows us. And he knows when something's wrong with us. He cares about us. And he's even willing to sacrifice for us. We see the heart of David, a man after God's own heart. We see the job that he had, and we see the trust that he had. This is one of the defining characteristics of David and his life, because he trusted in God. Even above himself, he trusted in God. I love the story of David and Goliath. And I love the audacity that David has as he faces Goliath, but it's not my favorite story in David's life. Right up there at the top of my favorites is found in 1 Samuel chapter 26. David is on the run, you remember, from King Saul. And he has had multiple opportunities to kill the guy. After, remember, King Saul tried to kill David and then chased him out of the kingdom and tried to kill him again. And again and again and again. 1 Samuel chapter 26, he's in the cave. And he's hiding from King Saul. He comes out of the cave. And lo and behold, wouldn't you believe it, there is the camp of Saul. These are the guys chasing his life. Picking up in verse 8, reading through verse 11, it reads this way. Abishai, who's with David, Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please, let me pin him to the earth with one stroke. I will not strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, look at this. Wouldn't you have done it? Wouldn't you have let that guy say, go for it. Let's get this over with. After all, God anointed me king of Israel. I think I would have. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or this day he will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now take your spear that is in your hand, that is at his head, and the jar of water, and let us go. Man, that's a lot of strength. That's a lot of restraint, isn't it? Your enemy is right in front of you, and you say, let's just let him go. God's going to take care of it. I think this demonstrates the trust that he has in God. Jesus demonstrated similar trust. You remember the instance, one of the few instances that are recorded in all four gospel accounts, when Jesus feeds 5,000 men. John adds at the end of that account, John adds an addendum that is not found anywhere else about Jesus. Verse 15 of John chapter 6, it says this. Perceiving, after he's fed 5,000, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Don't you think Jesus kind of wanted that? I don't know. But I do know that he trusted in God. And as you read very quickly, as you read the triumphal entry, which is like the instance where the crowd was all over Jesus, wanting him to be king, every single instance mentions Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Every single instance indicates that this was to make him a king, that their intention was to make him the king, the one, Hosanna, son of David, the one who is going to come, the lineage of David. John chapter 12, the instance that we have in the book of John. This is what it says in verse 13. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, saying, crying out, Hosanna, blessed is, look at, he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. But yet, Jesus trusted in God. Even when they tried to make him king, Jesus trusted in God over and over and over again. We see the similarities between David and Jesus, their heart, their job, their trust, and finally, they had a zeal for God, unlike anyone else. Let's go to 2 Samuel now. Through the life of David, we arrive at 2 Samuel chapter 7. This is an instance where David was refused by God to do something that he wanted to do. David looked around and he saw where he lived, and he looked out and he saw the tabernacle and where God dwelled. And he made a decision. Now when the king, this is 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 1. Now when the king lived in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from all his surrounding enemies, the king said to Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent. This isn't right, if I could paraphrase. Look around. I'm dwelling in this beautiful palace, and God is in a tent. This ain't right. God is better than me. God deserves more than this. God deserves the very best. Let's build him this beautiful place to dwell. It seems as if the zeal of David was pointing in that direction. Another similar instance in the life of Jesus was Jesus' zeal for that house. In John chapter 2, Jesus cleanses the temple. We're going to begin in verse 16. And he told those who sold pigeons, take these things away and do not make my Father's house a house of trade. Now his disciples, in verse 17 on the screen, his disciples remembered, look at this, that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. Zeal for your house will consume me. Now that's a quotation from Psalm 69. Ironically, Psalm 69 was written by David. Zeal for your house will consume me. They share a lot of similarities, not the least of which is the zeal that they have for God in almost every instance in their life, a passion for God that drove them to the life that they lived. I guess my question as I leave the lesson with you is, do we have that same type of zeal? Do you have that same type of passion where you look around at your life and you say, I want to do more for God. I want my life to be a reflection of who God is and what he's done for me. Does God control your passion? Does God control your job? Does God control your heart? Does God control you